good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinars. I'm Brian Gilbert, and I'm thrilled, as always, to kick off another episode of NCIA's Committee Insights series today, presented by Etain Health and produced by our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. For those tuning in for the first time, our Industry Essentials webinar series is our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programming, all designed to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. This Committee Insight series within that program showcases content produced in partnership with one of our 15 member-led committees. All right, but before we get started, a huge thank you to the presenting sponsor of today's program. Etain Health is New York's only women-owned medical cannabis dispensary with locations across the state. Women-owned and quality-obsessed, Etain crafts medical cannabis products that make a difference. Whether you live in New York, upstate New York, or the Hudson River Valley, you'll find that an Etain medical cannabis dispensary is always within reach. If you want to know more about the products and services offered by Etain, head to their website to learn more following today's broadcast. All right, now on to the main event. Since early 2022, NCIA's DEI Committee has been conducting an ongoing roundtable discussion amongst multiple cannabis industry companies and social equity organizations, all with a vested interest in New York's adult use cannabis market. The goal of this group has been twofold: to both assess the ongoing rollout across the Empire State and, more importantly, provide feedback regarding rules and regulations to advocate for the foundation of an equitable cannabis industry in New York. In today's program, we're thrilled to be joined by a number of members of this roundtable as they present these official recommendations jointly submitted to the New York Office of Cannabis Management earlier this fall. So sit back and settle in for what will surely be a lively discussion amongst these pioneering business leaders. But don't forget, this is an interactive experience, so make sure to post your feedback in the chat room, your questions in the Q&A board, and respond to any live polls which pop up throughout the program. All right, enough with the intro. Let's get this show on the road. Kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's program, Mike Lamuto, NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager and co-host of our Cannabis Minority Report podcast. Welcome to the virtual stage, Mike. It's always great to see you here. And looks like the panel's joining us as well. So welcome all of you all to NCIA's Industry Essentials webinar series. I'll pass the baton right over to you, Mike, to kick off the intros, and let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for everything you do, all the support and helping make this happen. Brooke, who's backstage right now, thank you so much for helping us with everything also back there. So yeah, really excited about today's panel. As Brian mentioned, for the last several months, really since early this year, we've been conducting a roundtable discussion with several organizations in New York, as well as nationally, that are interested in New York and making sure that New York is set up as an equitable industry in cannabis. So today we have some great panelists that have been part of this roundtable, have really weighed in and put a lot of their expertise and experience into the work products that we've created over the last several months, which we'll be presenting a little bit of that today. So I'm really happy to introduce everybody here today. I'm going to go around the table real quick and let everybody introduce themselves real quick, because I think that's a lot better than me trying to do that. So we'll go ahead and start here with Dr. Adrienne Adams, who is one of our DEI committee members and has been really penning a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. So Dr. Adams, welcome today. Can you give an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Pleasure to be here today. Basically, Dr. Adrienne Adams, I'm on the NCIA DEI Committee. I'm also a social equity member on NCIA, and I'm also the New York State Director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, who's doing great work nationally. And I want to thank, in particular, Eric Foster from Banks and Company, who has legislative experience all over the country. He really helped out a lot. My main purpose for being here is to make sure that all this legislation actually reaches people on the street. So many times that things don't make it down to help everyday common folks, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Dr. Adams. Appreciate you. And moving on now, here we have Frederica Easley. Always a pleasure to have you on today. And yeah, can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Frederica Easley. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the People's Ecosystem. We are a company that are owned and run by women, women of color, as well as representatives of the LGBTQ community. Primarily my role here, I am born and raised in Buffalo, New York. Family's still there. So a part of one of those communities that was specifically impacted by this. And so my focus is looking at language and looking at whether it's policy, legislation, rules, making sure that we are identifying harm, we are identifying where areas where language can be strengthened, or where there may be an unintentional problem. And so super excited about what's going on in New York, but we are in a position to make sure that we are not repeating things or lessons learned from other states. And I believe strongly that it's our responsibility and our duty to make sure that we are helping those who have been tasked with a Herculean effort of putting this forward, but helping to make sure that what is written in theory also matches what is meant for practice. And so that can be, the work that I do with that is seen on New York and Hudson Valley Cannabis Industry Association, as well as the Council for Cannabis, for Federal Cannabis Regulations, where I am co-chairing the DEI and Access to Capital committees. Thank you for having me on the panel. Everyone here is dope. So I'm just super excited to be amongst these individuals.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Frederica. I love your podcast, by the way. The People Are Blunt. Just going to throw that out there because it's an amazing podcast. So we have also here with us Cheryl Murray Powell, Esquire. So Cheryl, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. So excited to be here to talk about all the great things happening in New York. As mentioned, my name is Cheryl Murray Powell, Esquire. I'm a cannabis, agricultural, dietary supplement, and trade attorney. I'm also a psychedelics attorney as well, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I was a native New Yorker, born on Long Island, North Shore Hospital to be specific. Recently relocated back to New York from Florida. So I live in Harlem now, and I'm the COO of the Justice Foundation. The Justice Foundation is a nonprofit. We are focused on helping to facilitate the transition for legacy operators, people who commercialize cannabis during Prohibition, transition legacy operators into the legal cannabis space. Our strategy, we have a three-pronged strategy. The first prong is all about licensing and helping people apply for licenses and doing that absolutely for free. With the card license type that just completed, I worked on 23 licenses, or applications, I should say. We have one successful applicant, so we're really excited for our successful applicant in the initial disclosure of who the winning candidates were. We do this with the help of volunteer accountants and volunteer attorneys, so I don't do all the work myself. Second prong is all about career development and career placement. Shout out to our partner in that, NYS Cannabis Connect, and a recent partnership as well with 40 Tons. And the third prong is all about licensing brands into dispensing spaces. So super excited to be here. The last thing I'll mention is I work for CSI Creative Services Inc., and we do background screening for employment for cannabis, as well as background screening for commissions. So we have the contract for the Vermont Cannabis Control Board, as well as the Massachusetts CCC, and we screen all of their applicants for cannabis licenses. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. And I think I saw some of the audience here from Vermont today. So definitely a good connection there.
Shout out.
So absolutely. And so those of you that aren't familiar with the PIES program, we're going to talk about the PIES program today. It's something really revolutionary and forward thinking. And so here we have the architects of that, Cynthia and Moore. Can you introduce yourselves? Cynthia, we'll start with Cynthia.
I thought we were going to start with Moore. Hey, everyone. I'm Cynthia Mompoint, and I am the co-founder of the Black and Brown Economic Power in Cannabis, and also the owner of the Nambala Group. BB Epic, which is what the Black and Brown Economic Power in Cannabis is, an organization that we founded to ensure that individuals who are interested in being a part of this industry are receiving the information that they have, particularly those who may not be plugged into the networks that are having these conversations. And so we have about 30 participants in our group out of New York, who we ensure that they have information about accessing licenses or other ancillary opportunities. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an entrepreneur who wants to own a cannabis plant touching business, but also entrepreneurs who have skill sets that can support these businesses. And so we're really making sure that they understand that there is space and great opportunity to build generational wealth and be a part of this industry.
Absolutely. And last but not least, more.
Yes. I am privileged to be a part of this discussion for the first time in a long time. Those who stood on the front lines for the war on drugs are relevant in these discussions. So I'm just happy and pleased to be a part of a group such as stellar as this. And yes, Black and Brown Cannabis. I'm also a Justice Foundation Fellow with Cheryl over there, doing great things in cannabis. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, I get chills. Seriously, we do this roundtable discussion. I don't, can you guys hear me? I do this we do this roundtable discussion every other week, and I say it every time, but I get chills really getting to work with all these folks. And I want to give a shout out to everybody that is part of the roundtable that is not here today. I think we have a slide actually that shows all the different organizations and companies and associations that are part of this. Also, a shout out to Mark Salah and sending Mark a lot of love. Mark was supposed to be a panelist today, but is handling a family tragedy, basically. So just sending a lot of love to Mark. So, yeah, here's the different organizations that have been a part of this. Something that we're really proud of is the fact that we have worked really well together. We don't always agree. I mean, in fact, we often disagree about things. We see eye to eye on a lot of things, absolutely. But it's that 10% of things that we maybe don't see eye to eye on that can get pretty passionate, and we can definitely disagree, but we've been very respectful the whole time of each other. And as a result, have really created some amazing work product, in my opinion, and really gotten to learn a lot about how all these different aspects of legislation and regulation in New York and other states as well do in fact impact many different people very differently. So with all that said, just a shout out again to all these different organizations here, all these logos that you see here. It's not just logos; it actually represents a lot of the hard work that the people have put in. This is all pretty much volunteer time for everybody at the end of the day. But this is the kind of passion, and you got to hear the introductions from everybody here. This is the kind of experience and depth that we bring to the table here. So with that said, I think if we move on to the next slide, I did want to just touch base on our mission so that everybody here can kind of get an idea of what we're about, what we're doing. The Roundtable's mission is to assess and provide feedback regarding rules and regulations in a sensible and workable manner that keeps diversity, inclusion, and social equity at the center of the opportunities presented in New York State. So before moving any forward, I know we kind of touched on some of this stuff during the intros, but if there's anybody from the panel that would like to just kind of weigh in on this about kind of what the mission has been like for you and what the experience has been like for you being a part of this mission together as a group. Pretty much anybody here that would like to chime in on that.
I'll jump in. I was just going to really quickly jump in and just say it's really great working with the roundtable and benefiting from everyone's perspective. I think it's funny, like all the organizations that participate are gatekeepers for a certain underserved part of our community. And sometimes even, doing movement work, doing social justice work, you get so narrowly focused on your particular population that you forget others. And that's what I love about being part of the roundtable, is really hearing from other people who have been doing the work. There's no competition as far as who's more activist than the other. It's really about how do we amplify each other's work? How do we make sure that we're on the right side of history and that we are demonstrating and role modeling not only, how we should treat each other, but also how we can elevate other people without diminishing what we're trying to do individually and as a collective moving forward. So that's my favorite part about moving with the roundtable. And the other thing is, like, the people who are part of the roundtable, a lot of them, I have followed their careers in cannabis and their work in cannabis and have a lot of admiration for the people that I get to work with now as part of the roundtable, not naming names, but everyone present here, they've been in the trenches for a number of years, and we've kind of, circled each other, and we have a lot of colleagues in common, but I haven't had the opportunity to actually work with them and have discourse with them. So that's really beneficial for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheryl. We appreciate those insights. So, moving forward, and Brian, can you go ahead and make sure we advance these slides here? I kind of, oh, here we are. All right, so the work thus far. So, end of the day, I mean, look, it's great to be in the room with everybody. It's great to have these conversations. What I really appreciate is that we've been able to create a lot of work product. So I'd love to, direct this towards Dr. Adams. Could you give us basically a summary of, what we've created thus far and kind of how it came about in the first place? And you're on mute, Dr. Adams.
Yeah, it was interesting. I guess last February, so Mark Slaw, Mike, and I started having some conversations about how all this stuff was coming around in New York, and we wanted to kind of try and make it a model for the rest of the nation if we could. And the big thing was I was going to so many different meetings and listening to so many great opinions, and like MCBA put out a great white paper, things like that. And I said, this is kind of like if you walk into a bar and there's 20 great conversations going on, it just sounds like noise. And so I'm really happy that we were able to come together as a group, hash things out, and get through these different recommendations that you see there on the screen. The first round of rules recommendations we went through and took a hard look at everything that first came out early in the year. That is really, I have to give credit to OCM, that they really did seem to address a lot of the points that we came across in that initial round of rules and recommendations. And I let some of the other folks talk about some of the other letters that we have created and documents and things like that. Because there's so many points that I could make. I could go on forever with all of these.
Yeah, so just to touch base on some of these things, I think that as we talk about, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion has been front and center. I will note that this first letter was a good 18 solid pages, and it started out as a lot more than that. We did slim it down and really through a lot of different work. Eric Foster was mentioned earlier today on today's call. I also want to shout out Michelle Fields. The two of them really put a lot of effort and a lot of work into creating these documents. And what we really looked at, it was, also legacy, right? How does legacy play into this? It's one of these words that we talk about a lot, but it's not necessarily defined very well in New York or any other state necessarily. And in New York, it's really becoming a big issue, so to speak, right? How do we make sure that there is a pathway for legacy? Because legacy is a large way that we do accomplish equity in the industry. So this was definitely one of the things that we tackled in that document, using residency as a merit factor, not a contingency, right? Frederica, did you want to weigh in on any of this before we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, just specifically the legacy piece, because it is something that we had considerable conversations around, especially once the letter was released from the CCB OCM in regards to cutting down on the gray market. And so we wanted to be clear in terms of, who we were referring to, right? So we're talking, and I think Cheryl mentioned this earlier, but we're talking about, those who were operating during Prohibition. So these are not individuals who have opened up storefronts, if you will, or, whatever kind of location while we are in this kind of wait and see, waiting for regulations to be created and going through the whole process. These are people that essentially the reason why we are regulating cannabis is because they prove just how profitable this industry could be. And so the importance in terms of the legacy piece is acknowledging that and acknowledging that there has to be intention around how are we incentivizing and how are we ushering in and partnering with legacy operators to transition into the regulated market, because the reality is the legacy space is outperforming the regulated market at least 3 times the amount. So we we had conversations about this and wanting to make sure that we were clear in terms of what we were talking about, who we were talking about, and why, if you're looking at the carrot versus the stick approach, why the stick approach is really not going to work with this group in terms of a threat of law enforcement or things of that nature. It's like, yeah, I mean, they've already been dealing with this, like they've been operating, they've been doing what they need to do for years. under the radar, without having to worry about taxes, without having to worry about being regulated. And so we have to take those things into consideration as we are laying out this new system.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I always say this, but I'm always glad that we're recording all the calls that we do together, because there's a lot of sound bites and a lot of wisdom in there. Something else to throw out here too, just for those of you, our guests today, all of this is available on the NCIA website. We'll make sure we get the link here in the chat today, and also we'll be sending out, a post-webinar recap, and we'll include the link in there as well. All these different documents that we've created are available on the website. It's public. So, we want people to take this stuff and work with it yourselves. The other thing I'll mention here is that, the roundtable is not a closed door, right? We are always looking for other folks to join us in the roundtable and bring, as long as you come the way that we've talked about thus far today, and there's respect. And I know that the folks that are here today, bring that to the table. We're always looking for more people to join us. So I did want to say that. And if we could progress to the next slide. Dr. Adams, this was definitely one of the things that I believe you actually penned the official letter. Could you tell us about the advisory board and kind of like what the recommendations were and kind of how it came about?
Well, when the advisory board came out, for folks who don't know, the OCM has an advisory board of 13 voting members that make recommendations. It also includes 7 non-voting members that, for the most part, I believe, represent the different governmental organizations, such as the Office of Drug User Health, Office of Addiction Services, and Education. So these are traditionally departments that haven't been pro-cannabis. There's been a lot of abstinence and things like that in the works. So we felt like there wasn't enough of a voice from the particular communities. In these applications, all of them include some sort of community impact program and different ideas that these applicants have to help the communities. Well, there's no voice on the advisory board to really say, hey, we need that, or we don't need that. Things like that. There's basically very little representation of Black and brown folks who are in the actual industry. They are operators and community members that are doing great work. There's community groups in Brooklyn and Harlem who are addressing medical issues for the community, education issues, things like that. Their voice should be on an advisory panel as well. So we got together, and this is one of those ones that we duked it out a bit. We came up with an additional 13-member advisory panel with voting rights that can actually contribute equally to the conversation and look at these different proposals and say, hey, this would be great. There's organizations who are doing great work that could be amplified. Things don't have to be created brand new and start from scratch, as I mentioned before. And we looked at other states, like Eric Foster had tremendous amount of knowledge and work that he did in Michigan, and Mark Slaw in Colorado. And there were various people from all over the country to sort of bring in things that have been done to try and not duplicate mistakes. And Frederica had some great ideas in terms of who to bring in and the different voices heard. Frederica, can you comment a little on that?
Sure, Adrian. The thing is, the language, the MRTA, allots for 40% of revenue after operational costs to go to these impacted communities. And so part of what we discussed was wanting to make sure, look, if we're going to keep it real, we know that there are organizations in our community that don't always completely represent. They may be there physically, but they are not actually doing the work, and or people in the community don't resonate with them. And so we wanted to make sure that, if funds are going into, to organizations and or individuals' hands, that there are successes that are attached to that, and that they are currently doing the work, and that this is stuff that actually resonates with the community in terms of what needs to be done. So we wanted to make sure that, communities with special needs, that there was someone that was represented there. We did not see anyone representing our indigenous population. And so understanding that there would be cross sections where there may be one person who could check a couple of these off the list, and not in that way, in a derogatory way, instead of in terms of checking it off the list, but just saying, how do we make sure that we are capturing the voices and the needs, because we as people are not monoliths. And so how are we making sure that we're capturing that as efficiently and as comprehensively as possible?
Absolutely. No, appreciate that insight. More, I wanted to throw this question to you here too, because I think that one of the things that's been important in our roundtable discussions is, you actually are, we've actually listed on your LinkedIn, justice involved. You've been, given the status or whatever you want to call it of justice involved. So could you speak to kind of, from your personal experience, why this is so important that these are the voices that are heard, and, that this is created in such a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's validation. I know it's validation when you finally call it something, and it's been deemed a war on drugs for decades, from the highest seats of our country. All of the politicians and the presidents been calling a war on drugs. So we had an actual war with war crimes. So to bring that to the forefront, what that was really about. We definitely need to speak to those victims. And, we're talking about child soldiers. We're dealing with a space where Black men weren't allowed to become men. We were attacked as boys, like myself, right there in Freeport, New York. I was arrested at the duck pond, charged as an adult, sold to a minor at 14 years old. So this is a big thing that a lot of people aren't even talking about. We have been locking up children, over 1 million arrests in New York for cannabis alone. And Black people represent a demonstrative part of that. So yes, absolutely. We definitely need to be, and I'm always thankful to be at the table to speak about, these things.
Absolutely. It's really important that we make sure that these spaces, again, it's not just simply, the webinars and the panels, but also behind the scenes, the kind of work that these advisory boards do. It's really important that we make sure that they are representative. And that voices such as Moore's here are heard at those tables. So I don't know, appreciate you being here, man. All right, before we move, sorry, did you have something else you want to add?
No, thank you for having me.
Cool. Got you. Before we move forward and talk about pies, because we're going to talk about that in a second here, is, and I'm not sure, I want to flip this over to Cheryl here, but I'm not 100% sure, because I know that it was actually Mark that did a lot of this work. But with the packaging and the labeling and the marketing, yes. This is one of those things that, I think a lot of people kind of, this went by the wayside a lot for a lot of folks, but it was something that our group actually really dug into, and we submitted a paper to OCM that was pretty in depth. And I think they actually got about 600 or 700 comments. So I say it slipped by the wayside to say that, yes, there was a lot of comments given, but I didn't see as much, really spoken about it from the equity side of things. Speaking from the equity side of things, why is it so important?
Yeah, packaging and labeling is really important as far as survival of the fittest. Who's going to, how do you make sure people understand who you are, what your brand identity is, people who have an affiliation or an affinity with what you stand for, how do you demonstrate that on packaging? So it's extremely important, especially to, our legacy community. It has been for decades. The Justice Foundation, we submitted public comments alongside Unlock, which is the Unified Legacy Operators Council. I'm an advisor to Unlock, and some of the things we highlighted were the fact that co-branding needs to be very present, because sometimes there are these opportunities to collaborate. That could be a whole revenue stream for these businesses that it's going to be, for any startup, it's difficult. For a cannabis startup, it's extremely difficult. Some of the color restrictions, let's define what neon yellow looks like, or what yellow looks like, as it was included in the draft. Just even how we identify our strains, our culture in strain naming, it does kind of, it is a lot of it's around food, a lot of it's around food, some candy related things. And we're, no one's more vigilant about keeping cannabis out of the hands of children than the legacy community, because that was our greatest risk. That is what puts you under the most scrutiny when you are operating in legacy. So we were self-regulated for decades, and we got rid of our own bad actors that would target children and things like that. So that's not really what the legacy community is all about. So we understand that there's a balancing act. We have no issue with child-proofing or child-resistant packaging. We have no issue with not marketing to children, but we do want to retain our cultural identity with the strains that have existed for decades, some going back to being in the lamb's race category, like a lamb's bread strain, or sometimes people call it lamb's breath or lamb's bread. But is that, based on the original provisions that were in the packaging and labeling guidelines, it mentions bread, are we not going to be able to say lamb's bread, which is a native Jamaican strain? So I think, it was extreme. I love the fact that we did have the opportunity to give feedback. We encouraged all the people who are our constituents to include their own comments. What we did, as myself as the Justice Foundation, working with Unlock, is we gathered our 100+ legacy operators that are part of our network in New York, and we asked them for feedback. Everyone had an opportunity to give feedback, and then I worked to kind of consolidate that feedback. It was a joint effort, and we were really relieved to see, when we went to the meeting on Monday, the OCM meeting last week, Monday, where they announced the card licensees, they also announced the final rules, and they did take into consideration some of those concerns we had about the labeling and packaging rules and how it was inconsistent with our cannabis culture. We want to retain that cultural identity. As we go into the legal space, we want to create revenue opportunities by co-branding and collaboration opportunities. So it was really good to see the OCM reviewed that feedback, and they took some of that into account for as we go forward.
I love it. This is some of the stuff that gets me fired up. When you're talking about the self-policing also, I remember, and really the keeping it out of your children's hands is something that had to go back, decades and generations. I remember I actually, I'm from San Francisco, but I did spend the first several years of my life in New York State. And I remember the DARE program. And I remember, the DARE program, the police officers coming to the class and telling us that, if our parents use cannabis, we need to tell on them because they were going to help save them from overdosing and dying. And I remember going home and, telling my dad, who used cannabis medically, and being like, hey, when I say I went home and told him, I was very upset. I mean, I remember my dad still tells the story that, I came home crying that day, right? Of course, because I actually had, for some reason, believed anything that the cop said that day. But this is the kind of propaganda that's happened. And so I think that when we talk about marketing, we talk about, packaging, labeling. The reality is that it's a lot deeper than just simply, where things go on a package, where, what words you can say. It really does tap into the culture and the legacy and the social equity of it all. So I really appreciate
consumer protection. I was going to say consumer protection is important to all of us, whether we're legacy, whether we're legal, whether we're a government official, whether we're a parent. Consumer protection is extremely important. And when you look at, child protection and child resistant packaging, we've come a long way in that area. I always try to make sure that people, think about our alcohol culture and our wine drinking culture. And, cannabis packaging in the legacy market is more child resistant than a bottle of wine that's a screw top, so,
Absolutely.
let's make sure that we keep things in perspective as we're, moving in the direction of consumer safety. We want to be realistic, and we want to keep.
Did we lose Cheryl?
Toxicants. Am I breaking up?
You're breaking up a little bit. It's that Jamaican Wi-Fi there.
Okay.
No, so.
Oh, sorry about.
No,
Sorry.
all good. All good.
I guess my last
look,
point was on packaging, is the adoption of the ASTM International universal symbol. So I'm on the ASTM International D37 Committee on Cannabis. I sit on the executive committee as the chair of the DEI Committee, but I was involved in the project to define the universal symbol, to see it come so far from when we were like, should we use a stop sign or should we use a yield sign? Should we use yellow or should we use red? To something that's being adopted state after state after state as a universal symbol, and also other countries are looking at it. That just demonstrates what roundtables like this and work groups are capable of. So it was great to see that universal symbol was adopted by New York and New Jersey and so many other states as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I appreciate the work you're doing on the STM as well. So, something else I want to bring up here before we do shift into a conversation a little bit about pies. I really want everybody here that's attending this panel to know a little bit about pies today, because I think it's really something that's come down the pipeline that is going to, I believe, is really revolutionary and is really forward thinking and can really shift the whole conversation around equity in these different cannabis industry states. But before we get to that, one thing I did want to mention here real quick is we also submitted a letter to the governor of New York. And that was on the heels of President Biden, his pardon that really didn't cover a lot of people. It covered, definitely a handful of folks, but it left a lot of people out. And so when at the NCIA, we just said, hey, we want to go ahead and push this forward. And we put out a letter and we got approval from everybody on the roundtable. And I want to call out a couple folks here. I know that some of the folks here, Cynthia included, you said, hey, you know what? We appreciate the sentiment, but this letter doesn't do enough because it is leaving too many people out of the pardons. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the roundtable is the willingness of everybody at the roundtable to stand up and say, hey, no, this is what needs to happen. This is what I believe, and it was done extremely respectfully. Right. And so we actually put the brakes on, we stopped and we said, okay, we need to revisit this and reword this and be more forceful in our language and what we're urging them to do, and not just simply kind of just do the same thing Biden did, but, good to further that. So Cynthia, and then we're going to segue into pies here. So it's a good segue here. Cynthia, could you kind of speak to that and, what that was like and why that was important for you to make sure that we did indeed expand upon that?
Thank you. So one of the things that was really great is when that announcement came out by the administration, everyone was very excited and said, hey, this is a great move. And as a roundtable, we recognized, hey, this is an opportunity that we can send a message here in New York as well. And I think initially the move was to send the message to the governor that we would like to see something similar. But through our conversation, and I really appreciated the fact that you recognized, acknowledged our pushback, which we did not do to the entire roundtable. We just said, hey, Mike, we might have to pass on signing on this letter because it's not strong enough. New York has already taken the stance in that they want to be at the forefront when it comes to equity and when it comes to doing right by the war on drugs because of the stronghold that they had and the leadership role that they played during the war. And so, and I would say during Prohibition. And here it is now, we have an opportunity to do even more so. And so the governor's letter that we finally drafted and put together pushed and calls for New York to do more than what we see at the administrative level, so that it's not rhetoric, it's not feel-good language, it's not to check a box off and say, hey, we did something. We want to do more than just address simple possession. Because a lot of the times when our Black and brown men were being arrested for cannabis, it may have just started out as a simple possession charge, but then they got trumped up with so many other charges of whether they had weapons, whether they had, or whether they did not have those things. And so the push was to move to a broader request of all nonviolent cannabis offenses for those to be pardoned. And, you know, just for those who are in the audience, we went into deeper conversation as to if pardons are enough. You know, we say we want to address the harms. Is it enough to just say, oh, we forgive you for what you did? Or is it, do we have a role in saying, hey, you know what, we were wrong? And when I say we, I mean our government. Our country was wrong to wage a war against its own citizens. These are the types of conversations we're having in these roundtables. And how does that translate into something that we can then recommend to OCM and to other, to the government officials so that they can then implement policy and then in other instances, implement legislation that will have the outcomes that we want to see, and not just say, hey, we tried it, we put some language together, it looks good, but it didn't really translate into change and transformation and healing and moving forward from the impact of prohibition. And I'm very specific with that language because the war continues until we really get at the root of it.
Absolutely. I appreciate all your insights. And, you know, to add to that, I'll say, you know, we're not trying to check boxes here at NCIA either, right? We, you know, at this roundtable, you know, the goal is to really push this forward. So those of you in the audience today, you know, the call to action is work with us, join us, support what we're doing, let us know what you're doing so we can support what you're doing, because we need to keep putting the pressure on to make sure that these things aren't just simply, you know, something published on a website or something that, you know, goes in an article, but that we actually push and put that pressure on. So that said, before we do switch into pies, Dr. Adams, did you want to add anything to this? I know you were instrumental in this as well. And you're on mute there.
Sorry. I do want to say that and acknowledge that the OCM folks have really done some work on trying to incorporate some of this, and it's hard. It's not easy. You know, in MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act that came out last year itself, it actually in one part says that they want to promote social equity folks for licenses in particularly 3 areas: nursery, delivery, and micro businesses, and reduce the barriers, particularly there. And when the regulations came out, that, you know, they mentioned that for the license types that there could be a reduction or waiver of fees in that area. So, you know, they left themselves the wiggle room to be able to waive the application fees for those licenses, you know, without being, you know, and this is the hard part is, you know, sometimes they're not as overt as we'd like to see, but they did allow themselves a wiggle room. And you don't want to say, hey, everybody apply to these 3 licenses. So, you know, as you read these things, you have to kind of take into account that it's tough for them. But by the same token, that's where everybody on here needs to contribute. You need to make your voice heard. When they have these 60-day comment periods, make your voice heard, speak up, you know, so that they do realize they need to take certain things into consideration.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Dr. Adams. And yeah, and Federico, looks like you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add 2 things. One, along the lines of what Dr. Adams was saying, we were very intentional, or have been very intentional, about using the language to our benefit. So that was one of the things that I thought about afterwards in terms of the advisory committee. But, you know, we recognized that there was existing language for an additional committee or for the expansion. And so we understand that they are trying to do a lot, you know, and they are trying to do it as quickly as they can. We feel like our role is helping them, you know, is making sure that we're pointing things out that can be beneficial. And so one of the things, like I said, that we've done is make sure that we are referring to things that already exist. Hey, you already have the power to do this. Here are the people, you know, who actually can make these decisions. And this is what we're asking. So we're really trying to make it easy for them. In terms of what Cynthia was saying, and this is one of the points that I recall her bringing up in our discussion, is how do we make sure that we don't lose cannabis culture as we are regulating? So when we're talking about packaging and labeling and things of that nature, well, we're a colorful people. You know what I mean? Cannabis culture is colorful. It is vibrant. You know what I mean? It's a vibe, period. And so let's make sure, and Cheryl, to your point, let's make sure that we are not over policing and that we are not over regulating in terms of safety. We want everyone safe as well, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't also shackle or have unintentional harmful consequences, right? And when we're thinking about those who are trying to get into the industry, you have to figure out a way of allowing yourself to stand out. How do you do that when medical operators have already been here for several years, you know? And so being able to be creative and colorful with your packaging is one of the ways that you can do that. And I'll just say, as a mom, and I know Cynthia, you're a mom. Sure, I don't know if you're a mom, but anyway, you've been around kids. Kids are inquisitive. Like, Mar, you're a dad, like y'all are.
I'm a mom.
Hey, mom club. But we know that kids are inquisitive. Look, I have vitamins in the house that my 2-year-old has figured out that's supposed to be childproof, and he's figured out how to get into those bottles. You have to put stuff up. You understand what I'm saying? You have to lock it up. You have to secure it. The toughest packaging in the world is usually us adults who can't get in it, and the kids figure out how to get in it. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's really just trying to bring those things to the forefront. Like, let's be real here. What are we afraid of? What are we trying to prevent? And let's really figure out, you know, how we can address this without doing the most. That's
Absolutely.
all I want.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you and Adrienne bringing up the fact that, yeah, we actually have a lot of faith in OCM. I would say the people at OCM are people, and we know some of them, and they're really, I believe, their heads are in the right places as far as trying to make this industry the right way. So we're looking forward to being able to work with them, not trying to work against them. That's not what we're about here at the roundtable. We're about coming up with sensible recommendations that we hope can be adopted and be supporting of what the goals are. So that said, you know, I know I've been promising you guys pies. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you're interested, we could also do a follow-up webinar just about pies. You could probably do 10 follow-up webinars about pies because it's a really actually awesome program here. If you have any questions on anything, please put it in the chat. If we don't get to Q&A today, we will do our best to follow up afterwards. So please go ahead and put some Q&A in the chat, or your questions in the chat if there's anything you're interested in talking about, as well as if you're interested in being a part of our roundtable at some point in time. So with that all said, Cynthia and Moore, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could kind of run us through this real quick. I know that we're close to the hour, but I do want to make sure we spend some time on this because it is really important. So can you tell us about what Pies is and what it's about? Yeah.
I'll let you lead. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as we've been talking about with the roundtable, we're really focused on looking at how do we get the outcomes that we want to see in the industry. When we look out who's owning businesses, who are the operators, are they reflective of what we said we wanted to see? And the PIES program is a program that we designed in response to the lack of equity that we saw, not just in states that had across the country. PIES was actually designed before New York opened up. However, as New York has opened up, the regulations and the legislation in place, the frameworks that they have make way for PIES to be functional and impactful in ensuring that we have an industry where more than 50% of those who are operating licensed businesses in this industry are owned by people of color, Black and brown people. Specifically, when you look at the data that says that those were the people who held space during Prohibition. New York alone, the data came out, the OCM shared 1.2 million arrests from 1980 to 2020, I believe the timeframe that they looked at. And of those, over 50% were just Black men alone who were arrested. And so with that, how do we ensure that we're represented on the legal side as well? So that's what PIES looks to do. It's a program that looks at the challenges that other equity programs faced in this country and why they weren't successful in moving the needle from only 2% ownership. And how do we ensure that we don't have those same issues, we don't face those same issues in New York? And it's a program that was created for the social equity license holders, business operators, by social equity business operators, and really thinking about what are the barriers and how do we address them at the root. Moore, did you want to chime in on anything else there?
Yeah. Not only that, it's important that it was created by social equity people, individuals, but it was also created by individuals who had skill in creating programs and implementing programs outside of cannabis. I don't want to speak on, who's coming into cannabis being professionals, but we need that expertise, and the experts are here. They're right in front of you. And this is where this program was birthed out of. A lifetime of doing equity work. My wife, Cynthia Mompoint, and myself, somebody who stood on the front lines of the war on drugs, multiple arrests for sale of cannabis. So this was birthed out of a need. We saw programs all over the country, like my wife just said, failing. You understand me? So the charge is on us, those who are going to benefit from these programs, to create a solution. So this was a viable solution, the PIES program. If you want to learn more about it, there's some avenues to get to it that Cynthia is going to tell you about.
Just very quickly, an overview. PIES is an acronym that stands for Pairing, Incubating, Excel, Seed. And it really addresses the key barriers that we hear across the country and that we know to be challenges for operators entering into this, who want to enter into the space, which are capital, access to the technical assistance and the network support to ensure that they're successful. And then something, and even one of the ones that's consistent wherever you are, is just securing a location. And so PIES pairs an existing operator or a well-capitalized operator that wants to enter into the market with an equity operator, and they establishes benchmarks, which is part of the incubating program, to ensure that the equity applicant is able to not only secure a license, but also to become operational and succeed going into the Excel part. It's not just a one-year program or a program that just ensures that, hey, the equity person was able to secure the first license or the provisional license or the initial license. It ensures that that equity applicant, as long as they are meeting the different benchmarks that they're supposed to be meeting, and with the support of the existing or well-capitalized operator, and that support includes the technical assistance and it includes the seed, the S. So I covered all letters, the pairing, incubating, Excel, and seed aspect of the PIES program. And that relationship then allows for both operators to move into the industry and operate, and not just for us to see what we've seen in other states where there would be operators, existing or well-capital operators, help out them, the equity applicants secure the first phase, but then they move on and the equity applicant is never able to get to the operational phase, or even if they are able to get in the operational phase. When we look at some of the markets across the country, Oakland, San Francisco, a lot of you see these operators who have been in, they have gotten to that space where their doors are open, but they are still struggling and not receiving the support that they need. It really PIES puts the onus on the community, the cannabis industry, to ensure that there's equity, not just the policymakers, because that in and of itself is a big lift. And the other highlight that I want to stress is that it's for all licenses. So we're not just directing equity people into certain license types, because when you look during Prohibition, equity folks, Black and brown folks, were part of the entire supply chain in the industry, and we should see that on the legal side as well.
100%. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you, Moore. And what I'll say here too is, you guys in the audience here got a taste of what we're talking about with PIES here. If you're interested in learning more, definitely let us know. We'll do a webinar on PIES. Also, if you're interested, we'd love for you to join the roundtable and workshop this with us even further. That's what one of the next steps for there's really, I guess, 3 things coming on the pipeline now for the roundtable. One is we're going through the 282-page document right now. That was what we literally went over yesterday, and we're going to continue to go over that. We're going to put together our recommendations during the rules recommendations period. I think that's January 20th. I think that's due. So if you're interested in weighing in on that with us, please let us know. We will also be workshopping PIES further. Like, as you see, these are some of the brilliant minds that we have at the table that are here today. We also, as we mentioned, there's a lot of other folks. I didn't mention, I do want to give a shout out to Sister Rogers Solis. She's done an amazing job behind the scenes with us as well. I know I'm forgetting a lot of other people, But the point is that we have a lot of great minds that come to the table. This isn't just some fly-by-night thing. We're like, hey, here's some quick ideas. No, we're really workshopping this through, thinking this out, talking this out with each other, making sure we're covering each other, right? So, if you're interested in joining us or working with us, definitely reach out and let us know. That all
I was
said,
just going to say on the
oh yeah, sure.
on the PIES program, I mean, I think it's just a wise approach, and thank you to Mar and Cynthia for creating it. It really just mitigate some of the predatory behaviors and allows people to truly be incubated in a way that we benefit as a community, but the actual licensee benefits as well. I just want to remind everyone that the MARTA legislation does refer to those significantly harmed as otherwise law-abiding citizens. So, when we look at our legacy community, there are otherwise law-abiding citizens that deserve this chance, deserve this opportunity. And with a framework like PIES, I have more confidence that they'll be treated with the dignity and respect that was stolen from them during the period of prohibition. So thank you to Mar and Cynthia, and thank you, Mike, for leading this effort.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate you, Cheryl, and those perspectives. So I know we're right up against time. We are going to go ahead and do some closing remarks at this point for our panelists that can't make it on. This is going to be recorded. This is being recorded, so we'll be sending it out. If you are not able to stay on, we totally understand. But I do want to get everybody's closing remarks because I think this is an important discussion. So we're going to go roundtable real quick. Cheryl, do you want to start off? I guess since with the closing remarks today. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, this is all about liberation and freedom. We're in the legalized environment. Yes, we can celebrate. Yes, we're going to move forward and we're going to demand equity and inclusion. But we want to make sure that we remember the activists that did the work and try to include them as well, that we include our legacy operators as well, that we create a diverse market, which will strengthen our market. And there are a lot of people who are very much invested in that as stakeholders. So I just wanted to kind of really shout out the activists that worked on the legislation year after year after year before it actually passed. And definitely shout out to Assembly Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes for her advocacy on behalf of the community.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. And I see some comments there. Fabian, we'll definitely look forward to being in touch with you. Mary Jane Oatman, if you're still on, I definitely look forward to getting your perspectives on the indigenous perspective in cannabis in New York as well. I believe that's something we do need to make sure we include as well. And I saw some other comments about legacy as well, and that's definitely something we would love to be able to collaborate with anybody here that is interested in doing so. Moving forward, did I lose you guys again? Cynthia, some closing remarks.
Thank you again. And just highlighting the fact that this is something that's ongoing, both our conversation about the PIES and just in general, bringing folks together to give insight and guidance to support policy, legislation. This is a really powerful avenue that we have here to highlight how can we ensure that what we say we want to see happen actually happens, and just reinforcing that we are in a comment period right now with OCM. They have regulations, and that's what you were referring to, Mike. And so, and then the last thing that I don't know if you shared this, but these slides are going to be available for participants. So if they missed any of the content or any of the contact information, they'd be able to get that. So thank you. And yes, Absolutely. Please feel free to follow up and with insight, feedback, questions about PIES or even the roundtable.
Awesome. Thank you. And Frederica, if you're still there with us, there you are. All right, Frederica, some closing thoughts from you.
I would say ditto with what the two women before me have stated. I feel like iron sharpens iron, and we need all of the iron on this. Power cedes nothing without force. 80% of the regulated industry is run by white men. It is a reflection of the systemic and institutional racism that we see in all other industries. And so we don't want this to be another industry where we are left behind. This was built on Black, Latinx, Indigenous people's backs, on the whole community, right? Like the whole community has suffered. And so we have to make sure that we stay in this fight, that we don't just allow words to be put on paper that we don't speak to. And so we need all of your voices. You know what I mean? There are things that, you know, we all miss, which is, I think, why this roundtable is so important and so awesome. It's because, you know, there may be things that I'm blind to that someone else points out and vice versa. And so we have to make sure, because our community is not monolithic, that we bring our voice to the table to ensure that we are not left behind yet again. We can't just keep being consumers. You know what I mean? We have to be owners, and we deserve it, and it is owed to us. And so we got to get it.
Absolutely. And that's true equity, right? That's true equity, is not just simply being consumers in the industry, but actually ownership within the industry. Dr. Adams, some closing remarks from yourself.
Yeah, I just want to say that as the New York director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, I have a lot of people who reach out thinking that they've missed the boat. This is still very early on in this industry. It's in its infancy. Now is the time to lend your voice. And it's also something you can get into by just adding 2 words to the end of whatever you do. And that's in cannabis. If you're an electrician, be an electrician in cannabis. You know what I mean? Just focus what you can do, your skill set on whatever you can do. And it does not have to be plant touching. There are more jobs available to non-plant touching folks.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. And you know, at NCIA, we're made up of a lot of members, plant touching, non-plant touching. We're always looking to collaborate with others. So if you are a member, then great. If you're not, then think about joining our member base. I left you for last because I'm always, I don't know, whenever you speak, I always walk away with a little bit of a grain of, okay, let me think about this a little differently, you know. So what are your closing thoughts here?
My closing thoughts, God bless you, good night. It's like, nah, yeah, you know, is legal cannabis going to settle this war on drugs? No, it's not. I think it's a bigger story, and I like telling stories. I have a cannabis brand, and I want to put out other brands where we tell these stories, because I think that's the biggest thing that we're missing in legalization, is the context, is the backing. What would this war on drugs? It was a real war, decimated families. You know, I have friends of mine who paid the ultimate cost. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to be in these spaces, because I had a friend killed. Cops hopped on my friend and killed him because they said he had drugs on him. So they killed him, you know, with their bare hands. So, you know, these are things, these are flashbacks, and these are traumas that we experienced as children. And what are all of these dysfunctional Black men and brown men, these individuals who lived a life as a war where their government was attacking them, you know, how do they relegate that, and how do we go on? So I think medical cannabis is big. Cannabis, you know, in general is big. But I think there's so much more in the future of cannabis. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. I appreciate you more. And yeah, I don't have anything really to add myself, other than to say that, you know, look, if you're in today's audience, or if you're listening to this recording, reach out to us. As you can tell, I think from everything here, you know, we want to work with you. We want to work together, and we know this is an important and long battle. So the more people that we have to work with on this journey, the better. So appreciate everybody here. Thank you so much to our panelists. I'm going to hand over to Brian to close us out today. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And we will be in touch with some follow-up and answering your questions and so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you, Mike, for not only leading today's conversation, but bringing together this incredibly diverse and very well-informed group of contributors to this roundtable conversation over the last few months. The passion that you all are bringing to this conversation alone speaks volumes. So I can only imagine the actual conversations and how deep you all get into this work in these dedicated roundtable calls. So huge thank you to you, Mike, for leading this program here at NCIA, and as well to all of the members of the roundtable, and in particular the panelists that are all joining us here today. Thank you, Adrian, Cynthia, Moore, Cheryl, and Frederica, who I believe just had to drop off for another commitment, and obviously for Mark as well. We're all thinking about him in these times right now, difficult times. So as all of the panelists mentioned, please do make use of this contact information liberally. Please do follow up with everybody following today's call. Make sure to follow all of their company's social channels so you can stay up to speed on all the amazing work that they're doing outside of the roundtable discussion. And then please do, in particular, follow up with them to learn more about how you can support these amazing efforts, and in particular, lend your voice to ensuring that the PIES program is really incorporated into the entire New York marketplace to ensure that equity gets across the board there. So as always, we're going to close out today's program with just a few upcoming teasers of some activities that we have going on that revolve around membership and engagement with the association. So first off, if you haven't already, make sure that you're signed up for our weekly Events Digest newsletter that'll keep you up to speed on all of our activities as soon as they're announced, as well as including some supplemental resources so you can make the most out of your involvement with all of these sessions. As a few of the panelists mentioned, we will be sending out a PDF version of the slide deck immediately following the conclusion of the program. So make sure to review that to get a little bit more in-depth understanding of the topic, and do reference all that contact information to follow up about the where you can go from today's program. And if you haven't yet, after that, make sure that you do sign up to our Events Digest newsletter. Like I just mentioned, you'll be the first to hear details about our soon to be announced Q1 series of in-person events that are taking place across the country, leading up to our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days next May that you see pictured here. In case you didn't hear about it at MJ BizCon, we will be making stops in our most established markets, bringing NCIA's industry-renowned networking experiences to your neck of the woods with a brand new batch of Cannabis Caucus and industry social events taking place in Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, NoCal, SoCal, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington states. It's going to be a packed calendar from January through April. So if you are interested in participating or supporting these events, we're really pleased to announce here first that as a special Giving Tuesday opportunity, we'll be offering a limited one-time 10% discount on all of our sponsorship opportunities at these events if they're secured through the end of the week. So don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on the NCIA's team following today's event to learn how you could support all of our in-person activities leading up to the most important advocacy event of the year that's already on the calendar for next May. All right, and with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinars. Our panelists are going to head to the backstage, but they'll still be available for the next few minutes while we close out the program to address any questions on the Q&A board or inside the chat room. So feel free to post those comments and appreciations. I really appreciate all of the engagement in the chat room throughout the program. It really feels great to continue to interact with our network in this live format. So I sincerely hope you'll continue your participation with all these programs throughout the remainder of the year. We've got 2 more committee insight sessions scheduled for next week, and the final fireside chat with our government relations team scheduled for the Wednesday following that. So a packed calendar leading all the way right up to the holidays. So huge thank you once again to the members of our panel for producing today's session, along with our presenting sponsor, Etain Health, and most importantly, our audience members and member business owners, which are essential in driving our organization's mission forward. We'll leave you today with this end of event credit sequence highlighting the 100+ cannabis industry businesses that participated in this most recent Cannabis Industry Lobby Days alongside our Evergreen Roundtable. You don't see your company listed here. That just means you need to head to our website, thecannabisindustry.org/join, following today's broadcast to join the movement for a responsible, sensible, and equitable cannabis industry. Enjoy, and hopefully we'll see you again next week for another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Thank you so much again. Have a great one.